Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We have new and exclusive information about the Podesta Group and what is quickly becoming an actual Russia scandal. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, there are concerns tonight about the diversity lottery. Is the diversity agenda itself making this country less safe? It's an important question and one we hope to answer in just a minute. We're learning a lot more about the Islamic extremist who murdered 8 people and injured 12 on the island of Manhattan yesterday. Fox's Rick Leventhal joins us with the very latest on that. Rick?
And Tucker, plenty of new information on the suspect in this case because of the charging documents and the U.S. Attorney's Office, which brought the man, Sayfullah Saipov, into federal court late this afternoon. He was in a wheelchair because he was wounded when he was arrested by gunfire. He had handcuffs on his wrists and shackles on his feet, and he is facing the first of many charges likely to be filed. Authorities say Saipov admitted to carrying out the attack, saying he wanted to kill as many people as possible and was proud of what he'd done. They say he was inspired by ISIS, that he had dozens of ISIS videos in his cell phone along with other propaganda and notes in his vehicle professing loyalty to the Islamic State, saying that he told investigators that he wanted to fly an ISIS flag in his hospital room after he was captured, and also had considered putting ISIS flags on the pickup truck that he rented from Home Depot, which, by the way, was hauled away from the scene here late this afternoon on an NYPD flatbed tow truck. Saipov could face the death penalty in this case because of the federal murder charges likely to be filed in connection with the terrorism charges against him, but the U.S. Attorney hasn't yet said, Tucker, if he will in fact seek the death penalty in this case. For the moment, they are scouring this man's cell phones, his internet history, and all of his associations with friends and relatives over the past weeks and months to try and determine if anyone else knew anything about this plot and if any of his associates might be planning plots of their own. Tucker?
Rick Leventhal in New York. Thanks, Rick. Yesterday, Sayfullah Saipov rammed a rented truck into more than 20 New Yorkers, screaming Allahu Akbar. 8 people were murdered, and the country is once again asking why. But the answer this time is obvious. Those 8 people are martyrs to a diversity cult worshipped by a ruling class. Saipov was an Islamic radical from Uzbekistan who worked as an Uber driver. He wasn't a physician or an exceptional scientific mind or a business magnate. He was doing a job literally anybody could do in a country where we have, to this day, a severe shortage of low-skilled jobs for the poor in our working class. Why was this man even in our country? Well, he was here because this country's leaders have decided that diversity, in and of itself, is of greater importance than the well-being of this country's people. That's literally true. Saipov was admitted to the U.S. under the so-called diversity lottery, something you've likely never even heard of until today. The diversity lottery was created a long time ago, back in 1990. It offers immigration visas to 50,000 people every year. Winners are chosen randomly among applicants from countries that haven't sent many immigrants to the U.S. in the past 5 years. Those immigrants don't have to know English. They don't have to have any skills of any kind. All they need is a high school education or at least 2 years of experience in certain work fields. They don't need family here in the U.S., though once they've been admitted, they're of course allowed to sponsor others to follow in their wake. Chain migration, it's called. Now, supposedly, immigrants admitted through the diversity lottery must show that they're non-threatening and able to support themselves. But we know that's a joke. Our leaders are not even willing to deport criminal gang members who are here legally. Once you've arrived in this country, it's almost impossible to get thrown out. Discard the propaganda, that's the case. But before getting caught up in all the depressing details around this, consider the absurdity of the entire system. Diversity lottery? America isn't a game show or a mail-in sweepstakes, it's a country. And our government is supposed to represent the interests of the people in this country, its citizens. Instead, our leaders are treating America as a prize that can be won by anyone on the planet simply for existing. Why not sell diversity scratch-off tickets in convenience stores in Kinshasa or Kuala Lumpur? It's insane. The whole thing is insane. How do you know it's insane? Because the very liberals now defending the diversity lottery and calling you a bigot for raising questions about it would never in a million years practice a diversity lottery themselves. Would Harvard implement a diversity lottery for admissions? Of course it wouldn't. Harvard wants to be selective and only admit the best. It would never just pick 100 random applicants based on country of origin without bothering to check their grades or test scores. No way. Do you think Google or Facebook or MSNBC would hire with a diversity lottery? Just pick people at random without even reading their resumes? Please. Did President Obama hold a diversity lottery when he made judicial appointments? Does the military hold a lottery for promoting officers? No, 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 of course not. Because in all of those organizations, it's obvious that quality matters. You want to pick the best people and allow the greater organization to flourish. Somehow, though, and this is the most perverse part of all of this, the greatest organization of all, the United States, has decided that quality is irrelevant. Diversity has become an end in itself. Who is responsible for this? Well, it's not a partisan project. Leaders in both parties decided a diversity lottery sounded like a great idea. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York introduced the 1990 bill creating the visa system when he was still a member of the House of Representatives. In 2006, Schumer said he could tell the diversity lottery was working perfectly because he could see immigrants while riding his bike.
This is an excellent program, and nobody has said it's done a bad job. It's small. There are only about 50,000 visas a year. As I ride my bike around New York City on the weekends, I see what immigrants do for America. And this program has dramatically helped.
Now, irony of ironies, bicyclists have themselves become targets of an extremist who is admitted thanks to Schumer's grand vision. An excellent program. Okay. So excellent, in fact, that in 2009, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas lobbied to double the number of diversity lottery visas to 100,000. The only surprise is she didn't ask for 500,000 or 1 million. Why not? Diversity is our strength. Keep that in mind. But Republicans, to be fair, played their part as well, a lot of them. 5 Senate Republicans still in office today voted for the law that created the diversity lobby. They are Thad Cochran of Mississippi, John McCain of Arizona, Orrin Hatch of Utah, Chuck Grassley of Iowa, and now Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We reached out to every single one of them this afternoon to see how they feel about the diversity lottery now. McCain, Grassley, and Cochran say they want the diversity lottery abolished. Will the rest come around? We'll be watching. What about the Democrats? Congress is, of course, hopelessly divided on immigration, but we could at least unite around the principle that immigrants ought to be chosen because they can benefit this country. You'd think that would be an easy one. Many lawmakers would deflect if you asked them, though. They'd say they want the program ended as part of what they're calling comprehensive immigration reform. But there's no need for that. It's an excuse offered to allow lawmakers to do nothing, as they have done for decades. Congress could, in fact, end the program tomorrow without touching any other part of the immigration system. And if Congress actually cared about the well-being of this country, they would, of course, do that. But sadly, it seems unlikely any of this is going to happen. Why? You know why. The truth is our ruling class prefers immigrants to Americans. They don't say that out loud. They don't need to say it out loud. Watch how they act. Who are they more worried about? The so-called dreamers here illegally, or the 60,000 American citizens who died of drug ODs last year? It's not even close. Our elites see Americans as beyond hope, and worse than that, as dangerous. Just this week, you watched an ad in the Virginia governor's race premised on the notion that the biggest threat to this country is pickup driving Trump voters who want to run over Muslim children. Even though, if you want to get factual about it, in a country with 63 million Trump voters, that has never happened. Meanwhile, an Islamic extremist literally just ran over people with a truck. Yet authorities, as they always do, race to treat that as an isolated incident, a lone wolf attack with no implications for American policy. Are our leaders lying to us? Are they blind? Both, probably. Diversity is their religion, and in their own way, they're religious extremists. When the safety and well-being of Americans conflict with their faith, they will choose their faith every time. Mark Krikorian has been watching all this unfold for decades. He's the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies, and he joins us tonight. Mark, how did this become law?
Good question. This is sausage making. It was part of a bigger bill, but basically it was a kind of a pretext to amnesty Irish illegal immigrants originally. Because this was, remember, there was a big Reagan amnesty in 1986.
Very well.
The Irish illegal immigrants didn't qualify because they hadn't been here long enough. So they cooked up some way. Schumer was part of it. Kennedy, Al D'Amato, who was senator from New York at that time, cooked up this idea of diversity as a pretext for amnestying Irish illegals. And then it morphed into this program that is now a kind of affirmative action almost for immigrants from other countries who can't get in otherwise, as you explained.
But I mean, our whole immigration system is not so different, actually. I mean, we don't with some visa exceptions, but we don't screen for skills in the way that most countries do already.
Yeah, I mean, the large majority of immigrants, something like 2/3, are only brought in because of their family connections. And frankly, half of the rest come in because they're related to people who are skilled or something like that. So that skills really play a very small role. And in this visa lottery, literally, it's almost anybody in the world. And even you would mention that you have to have a high school diploma, for instance. But really, what does it take to get a high school diploma in Uzbekistan? I'm not criticizing the schools. I'm talking about you can go around the corner and buy a high school diploma.
You can buy one here. So in these many years, in the 27 years this has been law, has nobody said, wait a second, this is the greatest country on earth. Everyone wants to come here. Why are we handing out green cards on the basis of a lottery?
People have been saying this repeatedly. In fact, the House a number of years ago even passed a bill to get rid of the visa lottery, and it didn't go anywhere. It always comes up.
So who's lobbying against it? I mean, just let's put a fine point on this. Where is the lobby that wants to preserve something that makes no sense?
There's two forces protecting it. One is narrow, one is broader. The narrow one, interestingly, is the Black Caucus, because they have now come to adopt this as their pet immigration program, because a lot of people from sub-Saharan Africa come through it. And so that's the kind of narrow issue. The broader issue.
Let me just say, has any policy, any single policy in modern America hurt Africans more than our immigration?
No, it's a good question. And in fact, even African immigration is actually a problem for Black Americans.
Look at the numbers, exactly. Sorry, what was the second?
Yeah, but more broadly is basically our whole political class, because the idea seems to be that immigration must never go down and must always go up. And so anything that would cause immigration to go down or cast it in any kind of questionable light has to be resisted no matter what. So that when, for instance, the Gang of Eight bill did in fact get rid of the visa lottery, but it doubled legal immigration.
Of course.
It doubled guest workers. It amnestied millions of illegal immigrants. So, I mean, that's not any kind of price to pay. There's no reason they couldn't just get rid of it tomorrow.
And there's been a lot of lying about that exact subject today, so thank you for setting the record straight. Mark, good to see you. Leslie Marshall is a radio show host out on the West Coast, and she joins us tonight. Leslie, thanks for coming on. So,
thank you for having me.
The left loves the diversity lottery, I think just because of the name. I'm not sure if they're aware of what it is. But now that you do know what it is this how you staff your own show, your radio show? Do you hire people at random based on national origin?
No, and my great-grandparents, my Irish great-grandparents came here under the diversity program, so I actually did know what it was, and one of the reasons I'm here is because of that program, if you could
When did your great-grandparents come? After 1990?
My great-grandparents came after 1990. On my Irish side, yes, my grandparents, I'm sorry, did I say great?
Yeah. Okay, so, I mean, I guess congratulations, but you're not answering the core question, which is, and by the way, I'm not saying everyone who comes under the diversity lottery is bad. I'm sure a lot of great people who come. But the idea that the United States passes out green cards on the basis of a lottery at random, would any person defending that system apply the same principles to his or her own business? Again, would you hire this way?
Well, no, but a business is not a nation, and that's very different, especially a nation this size. And as I think you know, Tucker, I am one of the Democrats like Chuck Schumer, who was originally a part of this, and others like the Gang of Eight, who say it's about time that we get rid of it because it is irrelevant. You just heard the reason that it was implemented in this country originally, and we don't need it now. We are a very diverse nation.
Well,
regarding
it's not.
My own company,
hold on. It's not actually irrelevant. We just had a terror attack last night committed by someone who was admitted under this program. So it's very relevant, actually, and the country's suffering as a result of it. So it's still very much hurting America. But I just wonder why we shouldn't, with every immigrant under any immigration program, ask first and foremost, how are you going to add to the sum total of this country? Why would we let you in? Prove that we should let you in. I don't understand why we don't ask that. Every other country asks that.
Well, I don't agree with that, Tucker. That is not the case with every single country, and is not the case with every single reason, in my opinion, that we should have people coming to this nation. And quite frankly, Tucker, then we would have people here saying that immigrants are taking all of our jobs.
Well,
sure, we want the best and the bright. We want the best and the brightest, but why aren't we looking to make our students and our kids here in America the best and the brightest?
Well, I'll tell you exactly why. Actually, I have the answer to that question. which is we don't need to. We don't need to spend any time thinking about how to fix inner-city schools or any schools. We don't care that 60,000 people died last year of drug ODs because we can just import new people willing to work for less, grateful to be here. Immigrants have removed any incentive for the American ruling class to care about its own people. Don't you see that?
No, I would say quite the opposite. I would say maybe perhaps it raises the bar when you go into a classroom at MIT, for example, and say, how come we're importing so many students? How come other countries like China and India have math scores that are just off the charts compared to our own children here in the United States? And
because
that's not just in the public school system, in private schools as well.
Boy, I don't think, with respect,
Tucker,
I don't think
it's about a culture.
I don't think that you've thought this. I don't think you thought this through. Schools are eager to get foreign students because they pay full tuition, as you know. And the truth is, every one of those spots could be occupied by an American student. These are schools that take billions in federal funds every year, but it's not. It's occupied by a foreigner. And my only point is, shouldn't the U.S. government act on behalf of its own people first? It's a simple question. Do you agree with that?
I don't think that they should just be looking at, who is the best for America regarding academia and career in the workplace. There are other areas where we could have better. For example, here in California, we have so many lower entry jobs in agriculture that go unfilled, as you know, Tucker, because there are Americans that don't want to do it or overqualified to do it here in California.
I just wondered, does it occur to you that people will take a job if it pays enough? Does anyone on the left care about wages anymore? What people actually work? How much working people make? Is that a concern at all?
It is a concern. Thank you for making me the spokesperson for all of those on the left, but I know I like to make a good amount of money, and I think that most people do here on the left. But somebody, by the way, somebody who's picking the lettuce that goes into our salad, Tucker, is not making the salary that somebody who graduates from college
because they can hire immigrants who will work for
making.
less. That's the point. It's undercutting the wages of Americans. I'm really hoping to educate you, Lizzie. Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for the lesson, Tucker.
The state of New York may have put its own citizens at risk simply to avoid being called bigoted. We'll explain how that happened next. Until yesterday afternoon, probably against all odds, New York City had enjoyed 16 years without anyone being killed by Islamist violence. Could this latest bloodshed have been prevented with different law enforcement practices? You hate to ask that question, but it arises in this case because in 2005, the NYPD created a report, Radicalization in the West, the Homegrown Threat, it was called, and it laid out how U.S. Muslims could become radicalized. But that guide was subsequently denounced as Islamophobic. The de Blasio administration purged it in 2016 in response to a lawsuit by, you'll be surprised, the ACLU. Patrick Dunleavy is a former Deputy Inspector General of New York. He's the author of The Fertile Soil of Jihad, and he joins us tonight. Patrick, thanks for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So New York is famous for having a very serious kind of world-class, literally, police department, and they took this threat seriously after the 2 World Trade Center bombings, obviously. They produced this report. What does it mean that the de Blasio administration jettisoned it?
Well, what they basically did is they caved into political correctness. Nobody was looking at the fact that what the NYPD was doing was normal police practices when it came to investigating crime. And if we're going to say that terrorism is a crime, which obviously we've just charged this individual in federal court and we've given him Miranda rights, then there are certain police practices that are normal: surveillance, undercover operatives, knowing the neighborhood to which you're going to go. For instance, if you're going to look for a clean shirt for your show tomorrow, you're probably going to go to your closet or to your dresser. You're not going to go to the refrigerator. In the same way, if I'm looking for an organized crime figure from the mafia, I'm probably going to go to an Italian neighborhood. So now if we're looking for radical Islamic terrorists, we should probably be going to predominantly Muslim neighborhoods. That would just be common police practices.
Of course it would. So what about that changed under de Blasio?
Well, there were complaints made by not just the ACLU, but certain Muslim activist groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations and other groups that said that we were profiling, that it was unfair, that we ought not to do it. This had never been happening before. And instead of actually showing that it was a normal police practice to do these things, they just caved in. It was like throwing up the white flag and saying, "Oh no, we don't want it. We want to be perfectly polite. We don't want to offend anybody." Meanwhile, the cost was the public safety.
Really quickly, Patrick, was there any evidence that the police in New York were violating people's civil rights, hassling people, hurting people under the current policing regime?
No, in fact, that particular lawsuit that was filed was ruled on by a Judge Martini, was the individual who ruled on the case, and said there were no damages. One of the things that they sued for were damages. There were no damages done by the New York City Police Department when they surveilled these particular neighborhoods. And then when the case was reinstated on appeal, instead of fighting the case, and there was probably a 99.9% chance that they were going to, NYPD would win the case on appeal, because a new regime had come in. Bloomberg had no longer been mayor. De Blasio came in, and he caved. And when you look at the fact that the new procedure calls for a civilian to be appointed to oversee any requests to go into particular neighborhoods or particular religious organizations, that person is appointed by the mayor. Now, the mayor of New York City has praised domestic terrorists.
So, I mean, no, it's exactly right.
So when we say we're going to do that, instead of letting the police be the police, we cave in.
Of course we have. Patrick, thank you. That was really interesting and important.
My pleasure.
Thank you. The indictment of Paul Manafort says something about the Trump administration. It may say a lot more about the Congress, and we'll explain why that is next. America, we've been told for the last year, is besieged by shadowy foreign actors seeking to undermine American interests. Now, the people making that claim, you may have noticed, are doing it for partisan reasons, but that doesn't mean they're entirely wrong. In fact, it turns out they might be more right than they know. And the real problem has very little to do with the last presidential election. Washington is indeed awash in foreign money. Other countries pay lobbyists to do their bidding here. We got a window into how all of this works in Monday's indictment of Paul Manafort. Now, according to federal investigators, Manafort took money from pro-Russia political figures in Ukraine and funneled that cash through lobbyists in D.C. One of the lobbying firms Manafort hired is called the Podesta Group. Its founders, Tony and John Podesta, are probably the single best connected Democrats in Washington, in part because they're among Bill and Hillary Clinton's oldest and closest friends. What exactly did the Podesta Group do with all the money they got from Paul Manafort, who got it from the Ukrainians? Well, according to the federal indictment, Tony Podesta, quote, lobbied multiple members of Congress and their staffs about Ukraine sanctions, the validity of Ukraine elections, and the propriety of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych imprisoning his presidential rival, end quote. Now, did you catch the key phrase in there? It was members of Congress. The Ukrainians were not paying to influence a presidential campaign. They were paying to sway the Congress, the body that makes this country's laws. According to a confidential source we talked to, the Podesta Group consistently arranged meetings between American lawmakers and pro-Russian agents. Our source says Podesta set up several meetings between pro-Russian Ukrainians and then Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Menendez of New Jersey. Probably not too surprising, Menendez, you'll recall, is currently on trial for bribery. We reached out to his office this afternoon for comment and got this from Tricia Enright, his communications director, quote, when Tucker Carlson acts like a real journalist and not a puppet for the alt-right conspiracy theorists, we will be happy to work with him. Menendez probably has nothing to lose at this point. But all of it does raise an interesting question. Which other lawmakers in Washington were meeting with and perhaps doing the bidding of agents of a rival hostile government? Well, the frustrating, indeed the infuriating answer is we don't know. Lobbyists are required by law to disclose which foreign governments they're working for. Members of Congress have exempted themselves from that disclosure requirement. They can meet with all the foreign agents they want. They can change U.S. law and policy based on those meetings, and they never have to reveal any of it to the public. And that's exactly what they do. It happens every single day here, and it's all in secret. Other governments influence American policy all the time in big ways and small, and you don't have the right to know about any of it. Looking for a foreign influence scandal? We've got one for you, and it's extensive. Take the Podesta Group. According to federal documents, the Podesta Group didn't just work for the Ukrainians. They also lobbied on behalf of interests in Azerbaijan, Iraq, South Sudan, Myanmar, Somalia, Kosovo, Thailand, India, Moldova, the Communist government of Vietnam, among others. According to our sources from inside the company, they were also unofficially lobbying for the Sultan of Brunei, an Islamic autocrat accused of numerous human rights abuses. In each case, presumably, the Podesta Group made the case for those countries in front of American members of Congress and their staffs. Which members did they talk to? What did they get in return? We don't know. Because as we said, Congress won't tell us. They don't have to. They make the laws. We do know the scale of foreign lobbying in Washington is breathtaking. In 2013, that's the last year for which we have numbers, the top 10 highest spending countries spent about $70 million lobbying D.C., and that's just the spending that was actually made public. Around the world, foreign interests know the fastest way to get things done in Washington is to pay for it, and boy, do they pay for it. Just counting Russia and other post-Soviet states, at least 440 clients have high representation here in Washington, lobbyists. Of course, that figure does not include entities that fail to register, and some of the most powerful ones don't and never have registered. Nor do these numbers include the de facto lobbying that takes place via informal networks. That might be the most common, it's certainly the most insidious kind of lobbying there is. For example, between 1999 and 2014, the Clinton Foundation received more than $10 million from Ukrainian sources. Is there anyone who's going to claim with a straight face there was no political intent behind that money? The Ukrainians are suddenly committed to fighting cholera and childhood obesity? Spare us. There's a lot more to the story, more than we realize, but here is the bottom line. Hostile nations are, in fact, attacking our democracy. They're doing it with the help of our own Congress. It is time for members of Congress to come clean and tell us exactly what's going on. Congressman David Cicilline is a Democrat representing the state of Rhode Island, and he joins us tonight. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
So you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Yes.
And we wanted to know what foreign lobbyists' interests you had met with. So we called over to your office, and this is the response that we got. I'm quoting. I'm sure he's met with folks who registered under FARA, as well as ambassadors, government officials, and heads of state, but they had no details. Why shouldn't citizens be able to know who a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee is meeting with from a foreign country?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I mean, we have a number of meetings as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Sometimes it's heads of state, sometimes it's an ambassador, obviously are lobbying for the country, but those are government officials. There are occasions in which people who are hired as lobbyists advocate for a particular country. They have to disclose that. Someone wouldn't get an appointment if they just said, I want to talk to you about Uzbekistan or Pakistan without. So they have to disclose that, and they're required, of course, under law to register, to disclose what they're paid, et cetera, under FARA. So I think that's really important.
But I guess it would make 2 points. One, many of them don't register, as you know.
Well, they should. And anyone who, and if they don't, I mean, I actually have a piece of legislation, it's a bipartisan bill with Matt Gaetz to actually strengthen the Foreign Registration Act to allow for, more tools to do investigations. So I think we have to make sure that law is strong. People should comply with it. It provides important information so people know who lobbyists are working for, how much they're getting paid, et cetera. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious question is, why is it taking this long? And there are huge lobbyists who don't register at all under FARA, as you know, and it's pretty outrageous in my view.
I agree.
But the real question
is the law, and everyone should follow it.
But everyone knows that it's not followed here, and everyone's always done that. It's true, and you know it's true.
I wouldn't.
But why isn't Congress,
Tucker, look,
why aren't you subject to the same disclosure? I don't understand
what I'm saying is, I think we should absolutely insist that people comply with the law. When Congress passed that law, it makes sense. It's important for when someone is advocating on behalf of a foreign government.
I get it. Then we agree. And I hope that you strengthen it.
I hope you're wrong that there are lots of people that are breaking the law. But if they are breaking the law, they should be held accountable.
But we know the Podesta Group didn't register in its representation of the Ukrainians. It says so in the indictment. That law applies to everyone
who lobbies,
but it doesn't apply to you, and that's what I don't understand.
No, because members of Congress don't lobby or advocate on behalf of foreign governments.
You're the reason they're spending this money.
No, that's right. And anyone who lobbies a member of Congress is required to disclose that they're working.
Why shouldn't you disclose it? Why shouldn't I be able to call your office and get a straight answer?
Well, no. I mean, you can call my office and say, who did I meet with in the last 8 years?
Why not disclose it? I mean, because what they're doing is foreign governments are spending money to influence
Tucker, no one's making a secret of it. What I'm saying to you,
that's not true.
No,
that is not true.
No one keeps a record of it because people come into your office.
Lobbyists have to keep records.
That's
why
right.
Shouldn't,
They
why
should.
Shouldn't you have to keep a record?
No, I don't have any objection to that. I mean, we don't do it as a matter of practice to keep a record of
Because you don't want to. Of course, you don't want to be held accountable.
No, it's not a question of mental health. I'm happy to be held accountable. I'm a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. People come to meet with me who are heads of state, that are ambassadors, that people who are advocating on behalf of a foreign government. I meet with them. They make their case.
But why shouldn't I be allowed to know that?
No, absolutely.
No,
I have no objection to knowing that. But don't say that anyone's trying to keep any secret.
Of course you are, or else you would mandate it.
No,
of course.
No, it's not mandated.
I know it's not, and that's why most people don't admit who they meet with.
No, I think most members of the Foreign Affairs Committee would admit that they meet.
Then why not just? It's really simple. Pass a law. Just pass a law tomorrow, and you should advocate for it and say members of Congress who meet with foreign agents ought to keep a list, and they ought to reveal that list to the public.
That's a terrific idea.
Good.
I think that's a terrific idea.
Did you ever meet with anyone from the Podesta group?
I haven't met. I don't think I've ever met Mr. Podesta.
No, from the group.
Yeah, I'm sure they're
on behalf of foreign clients. Yeah.
I don't know that I've met with anyone who lobbied on behalf of a foreign government.
Why would they come to see you?
Well, they have other clients that are not foreign governments.
So you never met with a foreign client represented by the Podesta group?
Not that I remember.
Okay. I wish we had a registry so we could check this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't keep track of everyone I've met with in 8 years.
Maybe we'll get one. Congressman, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
Representing such a great state.
Thanks.
Well, he's the most famous lobbyist in the history of Washington lobbyists. He knows the city very, very well. What does he think of the recent Podesta group revelations? That's next. If anyone knows the truth about how Washington actually works, it's Jack Abramoff. He is famously a former lobbyist who was convicted in the last great lobbying scandal about a decade ago. He's been watching the story of Paul Manafort and the Podesta Group and Mercury Public Affairs. And we asked him to come on to give us some perspective on all of that. Jack, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
So one of the charges against Paul Manafort is that he lobbied on behalf of a foreign government and didn't register as a foreign lobbyist. Apparently, the Podesta Group did exactly the same thing in its representation of these Ukrainian politicians. Is that common?
Well, it's certainly more common than it should be, and I think it goes on a lot in Washington. I saw it when I was a lobbyist. I think, frankly, virtually every firm has moments where they touch up against FARA. The problem is because FARA was created so long ago,
yes.
In the lobbying community, they think it applies to Nazis, that it was created for the Nazis who were...
Well, actually, I think it was actually
but they think it's still applied only to the Nazis,
yes.
And the problem, of course, is that it's not. It's applied to everyone. And in fact, FARA is the strictest lobbying law in the land, and by not keeping this law, and by the way, not seeing people go to jail for not keeping this law,
right.
Lobbyists feel they can just get away with whatever they want.
That certainly seems to be the view in Washington among people I know. How do people get around it?
Well, a lot of them get around it the same way that they get around not lobbying, not registering as a lobbyist to begin with, by pretending they're not lobbyists. They say they're public affairs people and things like that. Now, that does not actually take you out of FARA. That may take you out of some of the Lobbying Disclosure Act rules,
right.
But not FARA. And they get around it by creating other structures. For example, they'll create a non-profit structure and have the foreign government fund it indirectly, or the foreign political party fund it indirectly, so they feel that they're not lobbying for the foreign government. But I don't believe that's the approach of the law. The law is if you're benefiting that government and are receiving funds anywhere down the chain from that government or from their agents, you have to register.
So in the wake of the scandal you were caught up in, I think it was about 10 years ago, seems like yesterday, there was all this talk about how Washington was going to get cleaned up and lobbying was never going to be the same, and you've been back for several years now. Is it your impression that Washington is cleaner than it was?
No. I think Washington basically is the same swamp it used to be, but they rearranged the alligators and the lily pads. I think what happens is this. There's a big scandal, like my scandal, or like perhaps the Manafort scandal that we're now looking at, or the Podesta scandal. And all of a sudden, people stop behaving badly, so to speak, for a little while. In the same way, if you're driving down the road and you see a traffic accident, you see bodies strewn all over the pavement there, and people bleeding, you'll drive very nicely for the next mile or so. But then you'll speed up again and go right back to your bad habits. And that's Washington.
So as you look around, do you think influence peddling is as common as it was?
Absolutely. It is not only common, they're profiting more, the lobbyists and special interests, from influence peddling.
That's not my imagination. People seem much richer in Washington than when I came here in 1985. Do you think that's true?
I think that's true as well. I came here in 1981, and it seems to be that the town gets wealthier and wealthier. In fact, they say that 4 of the 5 top richest counties in the world, or in the country rather, are attached to Washington, D.C.
Is that because we make innovative products the world wants to buy?
Absolutely.
Oh, just kidding. Jack Abramoff, one of the few people in Washington ever to learn something from life. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Instead of talking about fighting terror, NBC News appears more concerned with Islamophobia. We'll tell you how that manifested itself next. The blood was still being scrubbed up in Lower Manhattan when NBC News highlighted the greatest hazard of yesterday's attack, the possibility it could encourage Islamophobia. Quote, Muslim Americans again brace for backlash after New York attack, the headline warned. Left unasked is why exactly they seem to keep bracing for a backlash. Mark Stein is a writer and a columnist, and we are always proud to have him here. Mark, so was that your first reaction to yesterday's attack?
Well, Tucker, 12 years ago, after the London tube attacks, the Australian columnist Tim Blair, a commenter at his website, did a note-perfect parody of a Western newspaper headline, and it was British Muslims fear recriminations for tomorrow's train bombing. And I thought that was pretty funny. And I quoted it in my book, and I've quoted it on stages and TV networks and radio studios all over the planet in hopes that people would stop retreating to what is actually not just absurd, but actually grossly offensive. NBC's headline, which actually is more or less exactly the same as that parody headline from 12 years ago, NBC's headline is actually saying we care more about a hypothetical attack on Muslims that never comes. We care more about that than, say, for example, the 5 dead Argentines being scraped off the pavement in Lower Manhattan. And that is actually a narcissistic and decadent intrusion upon the real news story.
But doesn't it accurately reflect how they feel? Indeed, so many of the people in their position maneuvering the levers of power in our country feel. I mean, that's real. That's actually their view, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think you saw it at the press conference today. The NYPD are saying, well, you better not get annoyed with any Muslims because we're going to crack down on that. You saw it in Governor Cuomo's initial remarks, assuring us that this is a lone wolf, nothing to see here. I actually think it's getting worse. I used to joke a few years ago that Allahu Akbar was Arabic for nothing to see here. I think it's actually evolved now. Allahu Akbar is Arabic for nothing can be done. The governor of New York State, the mayor of London, the prime minister of France, all basically tell these people, tell their citizens, you got to get used to being blown up, run over. If you go to a pop concert, you go to a restaurant, you stroll down the sidewalk, you bicycle down the bike path, a certain number of you aren't going to be coming home again. Tough. Allahu Akbar is Arabic for nothing can be done.
So what they're really saying is that feeling virtuous about diversity is more important than your safety.
Absolutely, and we know it's rubbish. I mean, I don't know where they're having dinner tonight, but let's say Cuomo and de Blasio, whatever restaurant you're in, if you walked in and yelled Allahu Akbar, they'd dive under the table like everybody else. If you were to walk in, if you walked in and yelled Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, they'd say, oh my God, who let that ghastly evangelical Christian in the door? Have the maitre d' take him out. It's appalling. They understand the distinction, but they are committed to framing this issue in a way that assures there will never be any strategic clarity about what is going on.
Next time I'm in a restaurant with Andrew Cuomo, I can promise you I'm going to scream that exact thing. And when arrested, I'm going to blame you. Thank you, Mark Stein.
It's a good test.
It's the best. Great to see you. Well, an old foe of this program attacked us today, so we're ready to issue a challenge in response. Will he accept? It's coming up after the break. In this morning's Washington Post, the progressive newsletter owned by Amazon oligarch Jeff Bezos, columnist Eric Wemple takes a shot at the show. I won't bore you with the topic of his piece. Like most Wemple editorials, it was poorly written and dumb, but at least it was consistent. Wemple's been going after this show pretty much since the day we launched almost a year ago. In February, we had him on the show, mostly so that we could meet one of our most fixated critics. How did it go? Well, this picture sums it up more precisely than any video we could play you, but the entire interview is on our Facebook page for those of you who enjoy that sort of thing. Wemple apparently never got over it, hence his column this morning. Strikes us it could be time for another meeting. So Eric Wemple is hereby invited back on this show any day, no matter what else is going on in the news. We can't wait to see him. And I got to be honest, that picture you're looking at the screen is on my favorites on my phone. Whenever I'm feeling sad, when the plane is in turbulence, had a tough day at work, something wrong has gone on in my life, I pull up that picture, and the palliative effect is instant. Again, it's on our Facebook. If you want to download it to your phone too and benefit from the magical powers of his bewilderment, we recommend it strongly. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every night at 8 to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. DVR it if you can figure out how that works. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity takes over in New York City. Hey, Sean.
All right, thanks, Tucker.